Welcome to the Gentleman's Guide to Gaming. They came from Classified. Operation Rainfall, Episode 3. That's right, Episode 3 of our spy feature and the recaps of this campaign. And I will take this opportunity to tell you that having now received my traditionally printed copy of They Came from Classified, which is absolutely gorgeous, one of the most stunning RPGs I own. I do love the art style, the movie posters we have littered throughout it. I am just delighted, absolutely delighted with how this one looks, and it's an incredibly vivid 1960s garish style in places. You know, part Bond, part the Avengers, part Jason King and Austin Powers, all those kinds of things. Do check it out, do look it up. I will link it below so you can find your own copy. Where did we leave off? Well, our agents in France had just overpowered Pierre La Parisienne and Joan Darcy, two enemy assassins who were seeking to take the agents down due to a contract that's been placed on them. After pumping these enemies for information and finding out more intelligence from a secret phone call, the agents were able to discover that assassins had been dispatched to all of the major cities across Europe on the lookout for our protagonists. It would appear that the events back at Agency HQ in London have spread further, because not only that, Agent O, that is Ophelia Knightley, was Ophelia Swallows Knightley, but she dropped the Swallows, spotted Agent Bind, James Bind, the world's top, most popular, most famous secret agent for the agency, spying on her from a duck pond with a wooden duck, maybe even a real duck, upon his head. They came to a certain conclusion, and it may be accurate. Our agents decided that the assassins that had been dispatched to stop them were actually hired by their very own employers. The agency is looking to not only plug a leak, but possibly blame our characters for the crime of Big X's murder. Now they have no friends to turn to other than themselves. So they left Paris, hot-footed it, having stolen yet another Mini Cooper with a Union flag on the roof, because those are 10 a penny in France. You know, they're easy. You find them all over the damn place. They parked in the French countryside, the only real surroundings beyond the grass fields and vineyards being a small shed in which a very large man with a brush mustache, thick eyebrows and a flat cap was selling his own bottled red wine. He couldn't speak a word of English and was chewing a stem of grass, just watching them or not. They didn't really care, they were just parked there. And they had the map out over the car's bonnet, the hood, to our transatlantic viewers. And they were deciding what they were going to do next. Because after all, our characters have got to get to Valverde, an island off the coast of Spain, which is where Monte Carlo, apparently a villain who Agent O, Ophelia Knightley, has ran into before. He has replaced one of his hands with one of her stilettos, not the blade, an actual shoe. Because he apparently knows who the leak in Agency HQ is. So they need to get to Valverde, they need to interrogate Monte Carlo, they need to find out who the leak is and plug it. But, of course, this requires travelling through Spain while they're being hunted. So they had to make some choices. They knew, for instance, James Bind was after them, and as incompetent as James Bind seems, he is an established agent. So they came up with a plan. They bought a bottle of wine, and they wrote a love letter. They decided that when they got to Barcelona, that they would find the most expensive hotel, El Ritz, and hand over this bottle of wine to the concierge on the desk and say, if there's a secret agent staying here by the name of James Bind, please ensure that he gets this bottle of wine and this letter and this underwear that we've tied around it in a bow, some, frilly, lacy stuff. Agent Bob did offer to use his underwear, but it was decided that James Bind would probably be less interested in that. And at one point it was wondered whether the underwear would be stuffed in place of a cork. But yes, they would use this to play to James Bind's seductive appetites, his lusts, and lure him away from where the party would actually be. So they picked up their bottle of wine and they drove into the Pyrenees. Keep in mind, again, this is cinematic France. So there's only two parts of France, Paris and vineyards. There is nothing else in France. And now we're in the mountains because we're about to cross into Spain. Cue a chase scene. That's right. They couldn't even get into the mountains without detecting that they were being followed by a villain on a motorcycle with a sidecar. And what's more, the person in the sidecar had a machine gun and was prepping it to fire. One of our characters, Agent K, Priscilla K, identified the motorcyclist as Emily Relish, mercenary and assassin for hire, former Olympic shot putter, and no one to be trifled with. Well, this is where our players made a spectacular dice roll. Got some good directorial control, got 6 hits on their roll, didn't even need to purchase a cinematic for this purpose, decided that, oh, wouldn't you know it, it just so happens that the Mini Cooper we stole is one that's outfitted with secret weapons and devices. And so the dashboard flipped over. Not only was there a nitro button, so they went speeding, we basically sped up the motion on in the film, around the precipices of the Pyrenees, but also there was a button to dispatch an oil slick from the rear of the vehicle. We added more, that perhaps this Mini Cooper once belonged to James Bind, and therefore Bind's progress to Spain would be slower. So, after much toing and froing, and generally Agent K, our quartermaster, criticising the design of this particular Mini Cooper, she would have never put the oil slick under that button. This is one of the designs of her R&D colleague, Agent Shayo, who we introduced in the previous session. She hammered the oil slick button just as Emily Relish was entering the rear view, and it spurted across the road in thick ropes of gooey oil that spattered all over Emily Relish's face and that of her passenger in the sidecar, of course on the road as well. And indeed, after this great spume of oil lacquered the road, the frozen, icy roads of the Pyrenees, Emily Relish and her compatriot rolled to see whether they could maintain their grip on the road. I rolled 0 successes, viewers. A solid 0. And so Emily Relish, without having even fired a shot, zoomed over the edge and down into a chasm. Luckily, at the last possible moment, deploying her East German... I wanted to say parachute at this point while running the game, but I misspoke and said flag. So she slowed her descent by that much, by holding an East German flag as she fell probably to her death. But we know the rules of cinema, don't we, viewers? If you don't see the body, if someone is simply falling off a cliff, they can come back in the sequel. And so, because the Pyrenees in cinema terms are about this thick, our characters suddenly exited the mountains and they were in the dusky wilderness of Spain. The sound of mariachi bands in the distance, people were eating tapas. Remember, this isn't how I think of the Spanish, but this is a cinematic representation, a 1960s cinematic representation of Spain. You know, we would be panning down, it would say Spain along the bottom. You would be able to hear, there would be a horrible mashup of Spain and Mexico, and it was probably all filmed in Mexico for the purposes of cost. And so with the hair's breadth and very little breathing required, our characters were in Barcelona, because of course, as we know, Barcelona is right on the border of the Pyrenees. And it houses a very large dock, and our characters were intending on picking up some seafaring vessels so they could sail forth from Barcelona and make their way to Valverde. Our characters, now here, decided that they were going to split up and go about their business in different ways. Agent O, for example, was on the lookout for a vessel, so what she did was wear a sandwich board. This was after depositing the bottle of wine at El Ritz so that James Bind would be suitably deterred. And although that wasn't what I planned as the director going into this, running this game, I was anticipating a confrontation with James Bind. I liked the idea so much that James Bind has basically been removed from the board for now. He is currently waiting in a restaurant on the west side of Barcelona, sadly drinking his wine and eating his quiche Lorraine, but with no dinner guest. All he has to keep him company is the underwear of one of our agents that he holds close to his heart. Meanwhile, Agent Ophelia Knightley has donned a sandwich board that advertises her services as a speedboat valet. She is walking up and down the pier and the docks of Barcelona, on the lookout for some rich types who might want to deposit their speedboat, get to somewhere warm and wet, and let an elegant lady such as her take over. Well, again, this was not something I was anticipating. This was a wonderful piece of player invention, so I decided to go along with it. And this is where our character, Agent O, encountered a very obnoxious pair of gentlemen and their wives. British tourists, the worst kind of tourist, especially in Spain, all saying Torremolinos, Torremolinos. In this case, they were a little more stuffy than that. We had Roger de Lodgerley and his wife Bernadette, and Otto Carstairs and his wife Sylvia. They were approached the pier in their speedboat, and Roger called up, you some kind, of course, assuming that Ophelia was Spanish, do you park speed boats? And so we had an extended conversation where Ophelia was pretending to be Spanish and Roger was trying to get through to her. In the end, Ophelia dropped the act after the deal had been made. Roger's wife Bernadette wasn't much nicer, and Otto Carstairs seemed to be the worst of all. Sylvia seems to be a much put-upon woman. And Ophelia, well, it plucked her heartstrings, I think it's fair to say, because she made a deal. She said, why don't I take your wife off your hands? Yeah, you go out, have your food, have your drink, and I'll show your wife the marina. Of course, Otto was reluctant, but Sylvia was seeing this as a possible way out, a way to get away from a boorish husband. And so Ophelia was quite insistent and quite persuasive, and in the end, they decided, the tourists, that, well, we didn't want a downer like Sylvia with us anyway, and so they left this lady with Ophelia in her care. Which sounds like a good idea, except now, at some point, Sylvia is going to be taken to the criminal hideaway of Valverde. So, Ophelia had claimed a speedboat, had claimed a wife, and was now waiting for Agent K. Agent K, Priscilla, our quartermaster, was looking for some kind of luggage, some kind of attaché, some way of presenting the hardware that she had stolen, borrowed from the agency, to use as her cover as a weapons dealer. Because if you remember, she's going to Valverde under the auspices of being a smuggler of weapons from the agency, and so she was looking for some boutique or other that would sell her something that would really give a snazzy effect to the articles she was trying to sell. She unfortunately ran afoul of some Spanish police or some Spanish soldiers. Remember, this is Francoist Spain. There's a soldier on every corner willing to check your papers, often wanting to harass you. And so she was indeed harassed by, I believe I do actually have names for these two for some godforsaken reason, Hugo and Pablo, the Spanish soldiers who wanted to check her papers. And of course she presented the papers she had for her cover ID as a consultant. They wanted to know on what it was she consulted. She explained marketing. That didn't seem to cut much mustard with them. And so she decided she would demonstrate one of her items. A lipstick with an electric charge. If you twist it once, it will electrocute you. Twice, it has another effect. 3 times, it will kill you with a nerve agent. And the soldier twisted it once, got an electric shock. Luckily, the soldiers decided this was hilarious, rather than this is an arrestable or shootable offence, and let Agent K go on with her work. She found a boutique, ultimately, where there was the perfect kind of container, the exact kind of box she was looking for, something made of leather, teak, precious gems, and most importantly, lined with uranium. So it gave a lovely green glow that really reinforced the idea that this is a box that contains dangerous weapons. It's not often you make a box out of partly comprised of depleted uranium, but remember, this is a spy feature. So now she has a massive radioactive box. I'll leave you with that thought. Of course, that isn't our only agents. While Frank Davenport, Agent Mirage, was unable to make it for this session, Agent Bob, that is the best agent of Bermuda, or best operative of Bermuda, Boob, and Agent Davina Stryker, our provocateur, they were looking for another way of getting to Valverde. They didn't want to all arrive in the same speedboat after all. Agent Bob's plan was that he would turn up as some kind of representative of the Olympic Committee, and Davina Stryker using her cover as a medical student. Agent Bob was an Olympian for Bermuda, it should be said, but Davina Stryker has a cover on her character sheet as medical students. They decided they're going to go in as drug traffickers, essentially. They needed to pick up some drugs or look legitimately as if they were in the market for some. So they found an out-of-the-way bookies and dive bar, the kind of place, a casino in fact, although not a terribly good one, that would house some criminal elements where they might be able to get an introduction to someone who runs in and out of Valverde. It's there that they encountered one Pascal Moroni. Moroni, a criminal who Davina Stryker has had an interaction with in the past when she was just a gold digger before she was an agent for the agency. I did ask the player, do you want any kind of recognition given that she's in disguise, and she's opting for no, not to tell Pascal that, we used to work together. So the ruse was maintained. Pascal invited them to play roulette, he invited them to play blackjack, but in the end they got down to business, leaving the croupier, a thoroughly charming woman, very disappointed. Pascal, who always has 2 dolly birds on his arms, explained that he is looking to enlarge his casino. In fact, he wants to build a casino on Valverde, so maybe there was a deal that could be made here. If he introduced them to one of the largest, most important drug suppliers on Valverde, they would bring in one of the highest rollers on Valverde into the casino he was intending on setting up. That kind of legitimacy would go a long way among the criminal elements on Valverde. So they decided they would go for it. And to do so, they decided they would ride upon his yacht, his luxury yacht, the Bounty, as it was renamed for reasons tied to a character's aspirations, and sail on that luxury yacht to Valverde. So that would be Pascal with his 2 birds, Mimi and Cici, the croupier, who it turns out was his mother, Madre, and Agent Bob and Agent Stryker. Of course, once they were aboard the yachts, Pascal Moroni was doing his best to seduce Davina Stryker, and that wasn't going all that well. He was also showing her his Viennese etchings, which may be worth a lot of money. He decided he would head up to the deck to fetch her a humidor so she could have a cigar, wrap her lips around something thick. Meanwhile, Agent Bob was in the process of being on deck, seducing one of the dolly birds, Cici, who had warned him that Pascal Moroni was a temperamental man, a dangerous man, someone who, if things started going bad, wouldn't hesitate to kill everyone around him. His Madre listening in, a woman who, not really surprising, she wasn't that charming as a croupier, given that she is wearing all black and a black veil, was just going and cackling in the background. Agent Bob decided to take some action into his own hands. And so he started up the yacht, suddenly, while making love to Cici. So, hand on the throttle, mid-thrust, and sending Madre over the edge of the balustrade, over into the sea, into the Mediterranean, just as Pascal Moroni was ascending onto deck to look for his humidor. "Madre!" he shouted, and dove in to the water. Well, the agents decided they wouldn't stop. They now have their luxury yacht. They've got their 2 dolly birds. Not really sure what they're going to do with them, except it seems now that Mimi is serving martinis to Davina Stryker, that they too may end up seducing each other. And so they sailed into the Med, where they might meet up with their compatriots on their speedboat, because Priscilla Kay did board the speedboat that Agent O had purloined, sat upon it with Sylvia, and Sylvia introduced herself as more than just the wife of an obnoxious prick. It turned out that in a former life, she had been a code breaker working at Bletchley Park and a good friend of one Alan Turing. Yes, this game disrespectfully invokes the name of a war hero. And that she knew Alan Turing, and she knew of Alan Turing's difficulties, and that she was always sympathetic. She did love him, in a way, when she was a younger woman. And their relationship was so strong that Turing left her some of his notes that she has always refused to show her husband, Otto. Priscilla was fascinated as the quartermaster. She, of course, saw Alan Turing as a legend and wanted to know what were in these notes. Sylvia explained. It turned out that Turing, after being dismissed from Bletchley Park, had continued to perform code breaking as a hobby, but now, instead of intercepting German transmissions, he was decrypting Soviet transmissions. Well, while he had died 10 years before this story takes place, maybe, given he was such a master at code breaking, this would be valuable information. Priscilla made Sylvia swear that she would bring these notes into the agency once all was said and done, but Sylvia was reluctant because, again, thoroughly disrespectful. The reason Alan Turing had been dismissed from Bletchley Park, yes, there were the well-known reasons that at the time it was certainly a crime to be gay, but more than that, the person, his immediate superior, who apparently had it out for him, was Auntie, the second in command nowadays of the agency, second in command to Big X, and maybe now that Big X is dead, the person in charge. Sylvia didn't want those papers getting into Auntie's hands after everything Auntie did that led to Alan Turing's death, so now there is a decision to make. And this all points toward Auntie being a thoroughly unpleasant individual. Was it just a lover's tiff, a personal relationship gone wrong between him and Alan Turing, or was there something more professional to it? Maybe even something espionage related to it that led to Auntie dismissing Alan Turing from the codebreaker personnel. Well, we will find out, because that was the conclusion of episode 3 as our characters were sailing into the Mediterranean. Finally, Valverde was in sight as they exited into the Atlantic. What will happen next? We will find out. Tune in next time to They Came From Classified. Thank you very much for watching.